May 16th, 9:58 p.m. I had a couple of minutes, so I thought I'd jump back in because I got interrupted earlier. Um, but where was I? Right. So Smith and Ron get into this. It's not even a slap fight. It's a I'm scared to death of losing you, but I am saying that in the worst possible way, so I'm leaving kind of fight, and it doesn't go well for anyone. And Smith buggers off for a long time. He's off doing colonization because at this point, um, that's the thing that's happening. Why is another issue. I don't actually know why. Um, couldn't tell you. Um, but yeah, so Roland's organization reorganizes into like an actual paramilitary force that has the mandate of protecting First Earth, and then later it's rapidly developing um, Solarian colonial network. Um, whether or not there's anything to be said about it being colonial in the way that like European colonies were is it's not the intent, but I haven't written enough of it yet to say for sure if it's going to fall into that trap. Um, Mar the Martian colony goes fairly well for a long time. It has steady ports. It eventually it has solid exports. Um, Ganymede falls into civil war within I think 3 generations. I think by the time the third wave has shown up on Ganymede, um, they've already essentially begun a civil war between the initial wave of people who feel as if because they were the pioneers they own all of the cubic, all the farmland that they've put together thus far. And the second wave who shows up as labor, they seem to the second wave resents being treated as essentially second class because they signed on to work what was put there by the first wave colonists, and it becomes a giant fustercluck within a few years. When Smith is putting together a team for the Arcadia mission, which is something way down the line later, he drops in just before the Ganymede Civil War starts, and picks up the son of a friend, who was in the first wave. It's one of their little colony's only doctors by that point, and he was killed through some shenanigans. I'm not entirely certain what happened, but it definitely had something to do with the colony leadership not liking how vocal the local doctor was to his patients about some of the questionable things that the political body had been doing. So, being people that like being in charge, they also like silencing people who are bad mouthing them. No wonder Ganymede fell into civil war. Yay, proto fascism. Uh, uh, bu- 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 So yeah, he spent some time on the moon. He spent some time on Ganymede. He spent some time on Mars. He may or may not do a stint in or on or near Europa. He gets around. But yeah, the story for Smith at least picks up when he's about 200 in 2192. He finally, after 60 odd years, gets over himself, like realizes, what did I throw away? And goes back to our city looking for his old friends, of which he finds neither hide nor hair. He can't find anything on them. As it turns out, it's because they deliberately hid the information because he asks them to. He kind of sets himself into this stable time loop. So there's an idea that I am outright stealing from this other story. I don't know if it was original to that, but it might have been. I don't know. That you have some level of protection from outside forces who can time travel by putting yourself into a stable time loop. By delivering information to yourself that you wouldn't otherwise have, you stabilized yourself from outside interference, because without that information, you wouldn't have acted the way you did. It's sort of like a bootstrap paradox or a predestination paradox. And you might wonder, where did the information come from? It's not a paradox because the information originated with the older time-traveling Smith from later. But it looks like a paradox because as far as the younger Smith is concerned, this information has come out of the ether. He didn't work for it. He discovered it. Someone handed it to him when he goes back to our city. But he shows up there, and he's looking for his friends, and all he finds is this busted up 60-plus-year-old android who he's puttering about on the computers trying to find anything. His access codes still work. Which is surprising enough. And the computers still kind of operate. They're 3 generations old. Well, 3 human generations old. And they're kind of slow by the standards of the day. But he gets by, he gets them on, he looks through old messages. There's a few there from Roland from slightly after Smith left. There's not a lot of it's been purposely misdirected, deleted, hidden, because at this point Smith doesn't know it, but he's on rails. The things he does are not predestined, but he's being drip-fed just enough information by himself in the future that he keeps going, because he's essentially the donkey having the carrot dangled in front of him, and the carrot is getting to see his friends again. At this point, he knows time travel exists, but how many time manipulators had Smith ever met at this point? 0. He knows that they're a class of humans that exists, just like he knows about every other kind of manipulator. But why would he ever have the need or cause or opportunity to have met a time or a space? Two of the 9 total classes that are relatively rare, and even more secretive, because they're... if somebody looks at Smith, the perfect regenerating immortal, you would say, your powers are bullshit. But he would look at a fully trained time manipulator and also say, your powers are bullshit. Case in point, I'm jumping ahead a little. He later meets Alexis Wells, who is a time manipulator he was born in the 1970s and was basically the guy you went to for time-related shenaniganery in the 21st and early 22nd century. And he's their stories are super intertwined too. Even more so once Smith starts time traveling, but we'll get there. Suffice it to say, he's never so much as thought about using time travel to fix his problems. Um, at this point, you could almost argue that he's probably suffering pretty badly from the kind of sorrow that comes from knowing that it's too late for you to fix your mistakes. Um, all the evidence points to all of his friends being dead, and the only thing left that he feels like connects him to them is this android who gets up after having been turned back on through the computer, calls himself Red, which is already pushing some of Smith's buttons because that was part of Roland's code name, and is like, I have information, let's go to the moon. I may or may not outright steal the name of the city in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Johnson City, or J City. I'll kind of have to decide because in the context of that story, it was named after one of the astronauts who was one of the first colonists. But their Heinlein later had a bunch of different universes, and I don't remember exactly what the details were of space history in that one, but it was Timeline 3, and it was specifically different from like the Lazarus Long timeline that had a different, I think it was Leslie something was the first man on the moon, as opposed to Neil Armstrong or whatever Johnson this was. Regardless, the major dividing point on Heinlein timelines was who was the first person on the moon. Here it's basically the outcome of World War One. So anyway, Smith and Red go to the moon. Amongst other things, Red's ulterior motive here is to get better machine parts. I don't know what the skin is called, because the first word that I thought up for the plastic appearing metal skin that Red's android uses was plasteel, or plasteel, Plasteel. But I realized that it sounds a lot like Plastisteel from Star Wars, and probably other places, because I can't be the first person to have just combined plastic and steel and made basically a super lightweight, high strength metal that you can work on like plastic. That cannot be that original of an idea. I might call it plastanium. There's some notes here about just coming up with a different name to differentiate that kind of unreal alloy, because really, how are we gonna, anyway, some future high-tech alloy to differentiate it from the same kind of thing in other sci-fi stories and other franchises. But his skin is kind of crap because it has a shelf life. Like, yeah, it's super strong and yeah, it's easy to work with, but he's been sitting in a cupboard for 60 years. And he hasn't maintained it. He's been deactivated. He's missing most of his memories, except for like his baseline personality, some weird quirks that sometimes make him sound a little bit too much like Roland, which makes Smith all kinds of uncomfortable. But that man wouldn't know how to talk about his feelings if you threw a psychology book at him. He gets better. He plays it off a lot like he knows better, and sometimes he does, and other times he's blowing it out his ass. Anyway, they go. They get replacement skin, joints, other improvements to his telecom systems. By the time they're done, Red is very happy with his body, um, because he finally feels like he's up to snuff for the first time after waking back up. Um, there might be something to be said there about feeling right in one's own skin. I don't think I intended that when I designed this scene, this aspect of his character. But I'm not saying it's not there. Um, anyway, so they, amongst other things, they meet up with one of Smith's few old contacts, um, someone who Smith remembers as a literal kid who was fighting aliens with them, but is now an old man with, a family. He's a little not there anymore. But he sees his old boss, um, and perks up, and like he's suddenly back. Um, Again, not necessarily something that I intentionally included, but it's there. It happens. Like he goes from not necessarily knowing exactly what's going on in his life anymore, because it's, he's old. What can he do? To suddenly going, he gets to his feet and salutes, uh, and Smith like helps him back down, because yes, Smith is 3 times his age, but he's an old man. But yeah, he gets some much needed information from him. Basically, um, he corroborates what Red has told him. Like, hey, something unlocks, and we should go to Mars. I think if you talk to the leading family on Mars, they'll have something for you. Um, and as far as like the actual reason, it's because this is where Smith can acquire more of his crew, can get his ship. And not for nothing, Mars is fun. Um, should I go into Mars? It's not super clear, and I'm not sure I care anyway aside from the backstory. But let's go into it real quick. Um, they go. Um, the two of them immediately get um, into a fight at the space dock, um, over some nonsense. I honestly don't even know what. It just says that there's a kerfuffle, but it has to do with with this other guy who, at this point, doesn't have so much a name as a reputation. He's a crime lord, um, and his men are trying to extort passengers coming in, trying to make money here and there. And suffice to say, they're blamed for the fight. These gangsters get away, and they get dropped into a jail cell with the magistrate, who basically goes, "Okay, I believe who you are. Your ID and all of your biometrics and your passwords check out, but I can't let you go because there's an open warrant on both of you on 3 planets. But seeing as how you've done nothing wrong, and this is my port, I'm just going to look over here," because the magistrate doesn't want anything to do with warrants delivered on Earth, the Moon, or Ganymede. Because Smith and Red don't have warrants on Mars. Go figure. Given that at this point, Ganymede had been ravaged by that civil war and was largely defunct as a world. And Mars doesn't necessarily not respect warrants issued on Earth or the moon, but even the magistrate's like, it's not my problem. You don't seem like you're actually a troublemaker. Get out of my jail. Which, fair. I'm not sure how Smith makes contact with the leading family, the Augustus family on Mars, but something happens that puts them in contact, and he eventually ends up having to deal with this crime lord who ends up being one of the Marstarian alien soldiers, who's basically been in hiding for the last 70 odd years, disguised. He's reduced. They're shapeshifters. He's reduced himself to the size of a human, and has been just trying to get by. And he found a lot of success being this mysterious criminal mastermind on Mars. Once the port really took off, once the city was big enough to support the kind of secrecy that he would need. Like, we're talking about a city that in less than a century has gone from being like a dinky little constructed habitat to being a sprawling complex, partially underground, partially above ground, with some very useful Marstarian shield technology protecting it from radiation. It's a big city, surprisingly. Like, as for the specific reasons why it got as big as it did, I mean, look, I could do the world building for Mars, Port, Augustus City as a whole. That's a lot. Like, I'm happy just to leave it at it's a big city that got a lot of money and a lot of economic force dumped into it to make it a viable mass human colony. It's good enough for now. Suffice it to say, he deals with this Marstarian soldier who ends up directly attacking Jeremy, who's the current Augustus head. He's very young. He's not even 20, and he took over for his dad, who died very recently. Like, it's still pretty raw for him. He's trying his best to learn the trade, which is running the city. Like, his family was one of the like inner circle loyalist families that Roland's organization used as kind of noble bludgeons to not quite force compliance, but to nudge the economic and social forces in a direction that they felt would be net positives for humanity. By the time Roland's story comes to a close, or at least the R-City story comes to a close, they've amassed a ridiculous amount of political and social power simply by very publicly using more advanced technology than anything seen on Earth to defend the city and stave off this invasion. Several European governments just outright go, okay, you're in charge now. Point us in a direction. It's a little simplistic. I'm not writing a political thriller. Like, that's just the bottom of it. The world... Here, I'll use an example. My modern world went from changing significantly century over century to, in the 20th century, changing significantly generation to generation. And now the world seems to turn on its fucking head every 5 goddamn years. Uh, I mean, the 20th century, you had the Great War, World War II, the I guess you could almost say that the combination that was the hippie movement and Vietnam, and the pendulum swing away from staunch militarism toward this like weird individualist streak that all Americans seem to have now. And then you have like basically the Reagan years and the long slow slide into fascism that spread from that. And now, since 2000, and I get it, I wasn't there for the 20th century, but it's very much like every 20 years something major happened, and that was the big defining thing of that generation. Now it feels like every 5 years something horrific takes place. I mean, just to name a few: 2001, 9/11, the Patriot Act, the within a couple of years, the U.S. invasion of like half the goddamn Middle East, the whole war on terror, all of that defined my generation, or at least my childhood. Almost immediately followed up by the 2008 financial crisis, which saw basically all the banks crapping themselves, the housing market falling out from under itself because all the banks were happy to lend out money for no apparent reason aside from we're going to keep making money doing this. And then when they suddenly weren't, everyone who went bankrupt in a bad way, and very few of them have recovered. And the few that didn't, like my family, stayed only barely ahead of the rest of everyone, and anyone who lost their house had it bought up by the same 4 fucking giant corporations, and now 3/4 of the houses in America are owned by them. And people pretend that there's a housing market when it's basically just a housing monopoly. That's a wild simplification, but that was only 7 years after 9/11. The next major crisis was probably the first Trump presidency, which saw America slide very rapidly into an isolationist hellscape bent on telling everyone who we had deals with in the entire world to go fuck themselves with a rusty spoon. Which, when we had 4 relatively quiet years with Joe Biden, which were fine, and now we're back to being 3 steps away from officially being a fascist state. Every 5 years, it's like I don't know, like it's like the world shifts every 5 years, and there's a few years where we feel pretty good about it and it looks like we're going to climb out, there's some hope. And then there's 5 more where for some reason somebody or some group goes, we want to make as many people suffer as possible for some reason. And I'm not saying that this is Trump's fault. I'm not saying that it's the Republican Party's fault. I'm not even saying it's actually probably the Heritage Foundation's fault, because let's be real, they were the puppeteers behind Ronald Reagan, and every Republican in charge of America since Reagan has hardcore been about social and economic conservatism, and I don't know, like lost the plot along the way. Like, I feel like these people thought they were going to rule the world, and now they're just settling for making as many people miserable as possible while shoveling together the Scrooge McDuck vault for like 4 people to play with. And it's either going to end in a military fascist regime significantly worse than that of Hitler's Germany or a very nasty, bloody revolution. And I don't know which one. I got off topic. The point is, if my world can change so drastically every 5 goddamn years, so can theirs. And we're talking about going from 2119, an alien invasion, to 2192, having multiple extraterrestrial colonies. And I feel like that's not too big of an ask without me having to design every government and come up with a textbook's worth of political theory to justify it. It's the setting. It's just there. Anyway, so this Marstarian soldier attacks, presumably trying to do suicide by cop, because even he's like, fuck, I've been on this planet too long. I need to just leave. My life is not getting any better here. Very dramatic when he tries to cut down Smith with a blade made out of his flesh, because again, shapeshifter. There's a lot to go into with how Jones' powers work. Like those, I have a pretty good write-up on. He has thousands of kilograms of body mass to work with, and he can shift it and shave it any way he wants, as long as it remains attached to him. If someone were to cut him in half, he would lose whatever mass is not connected to his brain. He wouldn't be able to use it anymore. But he has thousands of kilograms of mass that he's something mass conversion, and he's super dense, and he can futz with it. It's a whole thing. But he tries to cut down Smith, and he turns away. He's going to cut down Jeremy next. And Jeremy is kind of has his Sir Integra Helsing moment in Helsing. She gets run off the road by Nazi vampires and gets out and cuts one of their heads off and calls them cowards for hunting down a 20-year-old woman with machine guns. It's pretty cowardly. She cuts one of their heads off and is like, okay, who's next? At which point she's rescued by Alexander. It's a whole thing. I don't think she needed to be rescued. It was 10 more of the bastards, but she killed one without breaking a sweat. She probably would have been fine. But it's kind of his Integra Helsing moment, where he stands up to this alien monstrosity who's now hovering over him in big monster form, 12 feet tall and glowing purple blood, and really menacing him. And Smith comes up behind him and just hacks off 2 of his arms, and then stomps on him a bunch. Smith can take the punishment. He has regeneration. The mass he lopped off ain't coming back for this guy. And the body horror of Smith going to town on him. I probably need to write it a little better, but there's a lot of crunching and a lot of squelching and a lot of swearing. And it's not pretty. I have it written up somewhere. I'd have to go looking for it, but it's every horror slasher fan's fantasy to try to break something that won't break easily. So that's fun. But anyway, they deal with that. The crime syndicate falls apart without Jones, who's what Smith ends up calling the alien. Jeremy gives them this captured Marstarian ship that, for whatever reason, it ended up on Mars during the colonization. They'd been using it. It sits on his private port. They've been using it as storage initially for the city, and it just sort of lives there now. Like, no one can fly it properly. It's very slow and ponderous, and they can barely get the darn thing off the ground. And Jones basically goes, I would very much like to go home and throw myself on the mercy of my emperor so I can be punished properly for my transgressions here in this system. If I fly the ship there for you, can we do that? Can I teach you how to fly the ship in exchange for me getting to go and have justice served? And they basically go, yeah, like if you're being honest with us. And Smith's over here going, I will beat the crap out of you again if you're bullshitting me, but I'll believe you. It's a pretty big leap of faith on their part. But they go. Smith and co. travel from Solarian space aboard the captured Gardeston to the Marstarian Empire. So before they bugger off, amongst other things, they pick up something of an entourage. Amongst other things, they find Kai Anderson, this little 13-year-old pain in the ass, stowed away on the ship, wearing this monstrosity of a vest. She stole an experimental time machine in the future and came back looking for Smith, knowing that he would be on Mars at this time, basically to parlay her way into getting proper training for her job. She's a noble from the future. Actually, her story is kind of funny. I'm going to jump down a little bit and see if I can find it. So that's 2192. Kyle Anna Anderson is born in T City General Hospital outside of Rome to the Anderson family. Fastow was like her great-great-grandfather, I think. In 2211, I'm just gonna go on these because they're kind of hilarious. She's kicked out of Anson School for Exceptional Students for setting a teacher's accommodations ablaze during the night. The teacher in question would be found guilty of sexual misconduct the following month, which handily explains why Kai found it necessary to attempt to burn this teacher alive. Fair. 2212, a string of highly suspicious muggings wherein the victims turned themselves into the police, insisting they had robbed people themselves and gave the items back after being beaten. These occur on or near the campus of the St. Elaine School of Merit. A contentious detail is that the mugger, or reverse mugger, is a short, high-voiced girl with the ability of a classically trained gymnast. Kai is asked to leave the school due to the high likelihood of her involvement, even if the campus police and city law enforcement can't prove it. 2213, this is 3 years in a row. Again, this girl aged 11, 12, and 13, Kai is expelled from Roberts Academy for having been found to have instigated a fight with an older student. The real story here is she challenged a 17-year-old to a duel of honor over some slight he'd made toward a student without a noble title. There's nobility here. Like, again, it's part of the world building. It was part of how Roland used kind of the modern feudalism that came out of the last World War to better ends. But now we've come kind of full circle, and there's no shortage of noble twats running around running their mouths. So she challenged one of them over some slight that he had made toward a non-noble student, to be fought in accordance with the sanctified rules of combat, a phrase I stole whole cloth from Doctor Who, but I'm sure it's older than that, as set down in the 25th, it's the most recent conclave of noblemen and officials of rank. When she won, an insult and embarrassment for anyone who who follows those kind of things. The boy complained to his father, who's an earl, who raised issues with the school over allowing the children of nobility to duel without the express consent of the holders of rank. Even Kai's dad knows that that's bullshit, but he accepts it because he can punish that earl later because he's a much higher rank for his misconduct. The misconduct itself was interfering with the consequences of that duel, because it was, as far as their rules of engagement are concerned, that duel was legal and binding. And all she wanted was an apology to the student that older boy had insulted, which he never gave, which makes a bigger problem. So Kai, having been expelled from 3 schools in as many years, stole this time travel device looking for this immortal who she knows popped up on Mars some 20 years earlier, but doesn't know where he disappeared after that. And that's when she pops back there and shows up there, presumably for training. Amongst other things, there's a mention here. I'm just gonna highlight this because I don't know if this actually fits in. I haven't decided how to introduce Arthur or when, but I know I want him on the Arcadia mission, so here might be the wrong place for him to have my highlight. Might be the wrong place to have him introduced. So Arthur Saxon is that doctor on Ganymede who Smith picks up for the Arcadia mission later, thinking that he was going to find Arthur's dad, Jonathan, who had been killed. I think we're just going to leave him out for the time being. He's more important to have on the team later, I think. Anyway, but they also pick up Alexis. At this point, Smith has not met Alexis, so he kind of wanders in on his own, essentially going, trust me. It's a trust me, bro thing that I haven't entirely thought through yet. But at this point, he basically shows up and offers his services as a time manipulator. Like, hey, even the trip there using this old ship is gonna take you potentially hundreds of years. I can make sure that you show up at the right time, as long as you can get us there spatially. Yeah, and even Alexis, who is 48 in his first appearance here, but that gets wibbly wobbly later. Suffice it to say, Alexis and Kai's stories not only interact, but twist around each other in this ridiculous Gordian knot mess of who has more information at any given time is the person who's currently winning whatever spat they're currently having. So in this case, Alexis, who is in his late 40s, is seeing Kai, who is this is not the first time he's met Kai. Kai is his wife in her future, and they got married in his past. But now he's sitting here going, I gotta mess with her somehow. I've gotta fuck with her head. Because she's done the same to him. So he's kind of sitting here going, okay, I got this. And is gonna have some fun between training her up with Smith, who he's known his whole life as well, but also who doesn't know him yet. So they're all kind of weirdly intertwined at who knows whom when. This is not I think for Alexis, this is the youngest he's ever going to see either Smith or Kai. But this is not the youngest that either of them will see him. But anyway, so the crew right now is Smith, Jones, who's flying, Red, who's there because he's also looking for Roland with Smith because he has information locked in his head. Kai Anderson, who is very young and there for training, and Alexis Wells, who's there basically as he's pretty upfront with Smith about, yeah, I'm here to do a job for my guild to get you where you need to go because time travel is dangerous, but we can use it responsibly to help you out on this mission that we think you need to do because timelines. And Smith basically goes, okay, I've heard the stories, but what's in it for you? Like, clearly you want me to do this a certain way, but why? So he kind of has to get into the minutia of what they look for in correct uses of time travel. Smith is already on a predestination paradox, but Alexis can't tell him that because it would harm the way that the paradox is supposed to play out. So he's got to kind of bullshit him here a little bit, and Smith knows he's being bullshit because he can read people to some extent, but he doesn't know how badly, and he can't sense harm from Alexis, but he definitely knows he's being lied to for a reason, but he'll take it for the time being. So they bugger off to the Marstarian Empire, where they roll up at just the right time, and the Emperor, who knows that Jones buggered off with hundreds or even thousands of his fellow clones, to go and look for this MacGuffin, basically goes, I understand it was part of your knowledge base and your training and your clone batch to believe in the people above you. Not in like the fanatical way you would get from like Warhammer 40k, but in a, that's my superior. He's telling me, even though it seems to go against other higher directives, that we have to go do this thing, so I'm going to follow him. I'm going to go. Like, I believe in what he's doing. And it didn't go well for him or anyone else there. That's not really his fault. And he basically goes, okay, I'm going to make you the servant of this human. That will be your penance for the next 100 years. And then you may come home. And for them, 100 years is a pretty significant time. He's already spent 100 years in the solar system, but another 100 serving Smith. He's not happy, but he'll take it. Like, it's a fair deal. He was fully expecting to be stripped down atom by atom, potentially torturously. So the fact that he gets to live at all is already a step up in Jones' estimation. But in addition to that, like, he has to also go and do a job. So Smith is on multiple recurring jobs this way. It's starting to snowball. His initial goal was find Roland, and then it was take Red to places that he remembers to figure out what is going on in his head to get closer to that goal. And it's a lot. From here, the Smith's timeline gets a little bit muddled because I'm not sure what comes first. I'm not sure exactly when they find time for like Kai's training and for Jones' integration into the crew, but suffice to say, I'm just going through this. Smith and co. travel from Solarian space aboard the captured Gardistan, the starship that they got from the Empire, to go to the Empire, where Smith trades his services in finding out what happened to this lost planet Arcadia, in exchange for Jones's life and his service for that 100 years. This agreement forces him to have to travel with the ship back in time to fulfill it because the issue is transtemporal. He doesn't know it yet, but they think that the planet went missing sometime hundreds of years ago. But it's not that it's missing; it's that it's like time displaced. The scientists on it were fiddling with some. It wasn't supposed to be a time bomb, like literally a bomb that affects time. But that's what it did, and the effects are expanding out from the planet. So as far as the ground is concerned, like the epicenter of the time explosion, only a handful of months or even years have passed. Anywhere from like a month to a year or two has passed since they started the experiment. And there were plenty of other experiments going on in this little like artificial city they built on this otherwise uninhabited rock. But the one in the center was this time bomb. And it goes off, and the city is more or less experiencing the same time. It's kind of in bands. There's a lot of expanding dilation outside the city. For the most part on the planet, time is pretty much the same because it's fairly close gravitationally speaking. In orbit, in low orbit, time is moving measurably slower, but only slow enough to like affect radio transmissions a little bit. The speed of light doesn't change, but the time it takes for it to occur gets shorter and shorter the further you get down. So it gets to the point where communication is impossible because no one's ever going to figure out that to listen to a transmission from the ground going out, you would have to slow it down or speed it up. Give me a sec. Right, it comes up really slow, so you'd have to speed it up. And even then, there's no guarantee that your system is capable of doing that. Like, let's say that you receive these radio waves in such a way that they just come in as garbled noise instead of as a signal of any kind. At best, you might be able to record it as a waveform and squeeze it down and speed it up to be able to hear if it's regular radio. But if it's a digital signal, those theoretically ones and zeros, but it could be trinary, it could be any number of other whatever. The signal might be garbled, which is the point. They're out of communication. The fleet in orbit thinks that they've been there looking at this experiment for a handful of months, and they've been out of contact for hundreds of years. And even further out, the problem only gets worse. The problem stacks up because the closer you get, the slower you move. So sure, new problems appear to show up for the fleet every 5 freaking minutes, but for the people coming in, that could be tens or hundreds or thousands of years. It's a whole clusterfuck, which is something that they don't know yet. I'm just kind of going through this. So yeah, Alexis basically tells them, hey, now that I've taken you here, now we have time to do all these other things, and I can eventually take us back to the time period that we need to be in to do this. But for now, training montage, basically. Jones integrates into the crew. Alexis trains Kai. And at some point in this whole kerfuffle, um, Smith gets picked up to go and do another concurrent job, which is why it's kind of hard to write, because we're still in the setup for Arcadia, and we're now kind of putting a pause on Arcadia and going over here and doing manipulators. I don't know where in the timeline this is meant to be because it's kind of a hot mess. We'll worry about that later. Okay. So, at some point during the training montage, which is kind of, it might just be better, all this might just be better off as vaguely understood and vaguely referenced background material, because there's not really a story here as much as it's the setup for other stories. Part of this is the setup for Arcadia, and a goodly chunk of it is a setup for manipulators. So we're going to jump a little bit and go a little more into Alexis. Okay. November 23rd, 1976. Alexis is born. He's an Xer. Go figure. When he's 13, which is kind of funny because the last scene was when we saw Kai at 13, and she was kind of a crazed nut at this point. Like, very tough for her age. Alexis is kind of the opposite. Suffice to say, his powers manifest as a time manipulator for the first time around 13. This is not meant to be like a growing up means powers thing. It's more like, it's sort of random. Like 30-year-olds suddenly present as manipulators. He's just particularly unlucky. He gets a lot of future sight, and not a lot of what he sees is pretty. And it's his first haphazard suicide attempt. He went from not super well, not really managing, to being literally kicked over the edge in an afternoon. And it's not pretty. Like, it's not easy to even get into, because it's not a good scene. Someone who was very rapidly traumatized in a very short amount of time, with memories of things that he knows he hasn't experienced, but also knows in his bones that he will now. And he botches it anyway. I won't bore anyone with the details, but he doesn't do enough damage, and his father finds him very quickly and gets him patched up and starts him on with professional help very quickly. Like, it's his dad's very supportive, and is very quick to deal with what he can, which is, in the first minute, it's getting the blood's mostly stopped, but patching up what's there and getting his son to a hospital. But at the same time, this is 1990. At the same time, Smith, who has already been approached by a much older Alexis in the future, has already been brought back here. In fact, he was brought back in 1970, so even 20 years before that. I had to scroll back up. And his instructions were to establish himself, him and Red, as people, and make himself look like a solid teacher at pick an American accredited university. Um, and they're just they're vibing. Like, their job is to establish themselves, and because Alexis's guild in the future knows that he's immortal and can take the time to make himself look good. Um, Suffice to say, he eventually gains employment in 1990 with Anson Academy. You might remember Anson from, it was one of the schools Kai got kicked out of. It's also another Heinlein reference. It's his middle name. I actually got it's not only a reference to that, but it's also a reference to Code Lyoko. The school in that is Caddick Academy, which, if memory serves, was Philip K. Dick's middle name, Caddick. So it's kind of a sort of a sideways reference to that as well. Anyway, so he gets employed at Anson Academy, which is a school primarily for gifted students and manipulators. And Alexis gets into this school for high school, so within a year or so, he's there. There's not much to say about it. Like, he's kind of the homeroom teacher. He's the teacher that people go to when they have problems. He's a good teacher. Just kind of going down the timeline a little bit. 1992, Alexis, who's now 15, is talking. In fact, I have this as a side story unto itself. I wrote it as a short story. And he confides in his best friend, in Orion, who's rooming with, about cutting, and it's this like character growth moment where they're teenagers. Like, it's less a I need to go talk to a real adult about this immediately, and more of a I understand what's going on, but next time you feel the need, come to me, so I at least know that you're getting patched up properly. And I don't know where I picked up this notion. I may have stolen it from somewhere. I may have invented it. I could not tell you. If I get around to actually publishing any of these short stories, this one was called when I see it, I'll know it. I think it's called From Myself. Anyway, moving on. No, it's a rough moment for him, but I think that it's important that he has not only a best friend to play around with, but a best friend who can take him at his absolute worst and go, it's all right, man, I got you. Let me get the first aid kit and try and make this go away, just for now. 1993, Alexis and Orion are basically sent abroad to an American school in 2013 to investigate a time fissure. It's kind of a backhanded assignment from Alexis's future guild. It's supposed to be a test for him. And he solves it. The problem is that he has basically two options. Um, Kill the not quite time manipulator causing the fissure, or let the timeline fall apart. Um, and this was actually this whole idea of the two of them go to the future and have to deal with the time fissure was actually originally a Life is Strange fanfic idea that I had, that had the two of them go to Arcadia Bay and have to deal with Max Caulfield and her weirdness. So the basic events of that story, like I did like 10 or 12,000 words on it, still happen, but just not with those details. Oh, hold on. That's it for tonight. We'll get back into it. Bye.